We're at the very tip of the iceberg in terms of understanding how our genes affect our long-term health outcome. You might carry the ApoE4 allele, but you might also have a gene that negates the risk imposed by the ApoE4 allele. So the most well-defined risk gene in regards to Alzheimer's disease is the ApoE4 allele, which about 1 in 4 people carry, so it's very common. And it's pretty distributed all around the world. Various, ethnic groups have it. It's really, it's something that most people carry. And it's not a determinant gene, which I think is very important. It just influences your risk for developing Alzheimer's disease. We're at the very tip of the iceberg in terms of understanding how our genes affect our, long-term health outcomes. I mean, you might carry the ApoE4 allele, which puts you at anywhere between a 2 and 14-fold increased risk for developing Alzheimer's disease, but you might also have a gene that negates the risk imposed by the ApoE4 allele. For example, some people have genes that lead to more active levels of the FOXO3 protein, which increases longevity. It increases your odds to living to 100. So I personally wouldn't get too hung up over, your gene profile. And I think because we're at such an early stage of this field of nutrigenomics, I don't think that that it would change the recommendations that I would make to somebody trying to avoid Alzheimer's disease, whether or not they have the ApoE4 allele. So, I think if you find out that you have this gene and it acts like a sort of fire under your butt to get you, more interested in a brain healthy lifestyle and diet, I think that's a good thing, right? But other than that, I don't know, how useful it is at the end of the day to really become obsessed over your genes. There are some potential risks associated with finding out your genetic predispositions. It might, lead to lots of stress on your part, if you're not ready to receive that information. That's why whenever you do a gene test, they always ask you if you really want to know, So I just think it's we don't yet have the tools to really act on those kinds of gene problems when it comes to conditions like Alzheimer's disease. Certain cancers, it's much different, obviously, but for Alzheimer's disease, I think it might be useful to know your ApoE4 status, but you don't need to know it. Telomeres basically protect your chromosomes from fraying, much like a shoelace cap does to a shoelace. And they tend to get shorter with age. And the shorter they get, the older genetically you are. But the interesting thing is that we can do certain things that lead to a slowed rate of shortening for our telomeres. There's also an enzyme in the body called telomerase that actually can lengthen telomeres. So telomeres have this very interesting relationship with aging. They're considered one of the few biomarkers for aging, and scientists don't know why we age, but telomeres are related to the processes that tend to accompany aging. Studies show that people that take multivitamins, adhere to healthy dietary patterns, have healthy levels of vitamin D, exercise more, all have longer telomeres, longer, more robust, healthier telomeres. On the flip side of that coin, people that are more inflamed, people that eat unhealthy diets, that have lower levels of vitamin D, tend to have shorter telomeres, which again is associated with accelerated aging. So telomeres are an interesting window into the age of our genes, much like the rings on a tree. Insofar as we can, lengthen our telomeres, or at least slow down the rate at which they recede, I think that's going to pan out favorably for the brain. Some scientists refer to Alzheimer's disease as a form of accelerated brain aging. So I think that by minding our telomeres, I think that's probably going to serve us well over the long run. People are obsessed today with nootropic supplements, and I think some of them have merit, but at the end of the day, there's no such thing as a biological free lunch. So when we try to tinker with our brain function, it's sort of like jailbreaking an iPhone. Like an iPhone is designed to have the highest degree of functionality for the greatest number of people and to prevent mess ups for the greatest number of people by hiding certain features below the user interface. When you jailbreak an iPhone, you're basically allowing access to parts of the iPhone software that you're not necessarily meant to have access to, and that can lead to problems. I think the same thing applies to the brain. When we take supplements that try to tweak just one aspect of our biochemistry, that's a reductionist approach that I don't think is going to pan out favorably in the long term. We think that we have a handle over how certain neurotransmitters, for example, affect our brains, but there are dozens of neurotransmitters in the brain. I mean, we tend to only talk about 4 or 5 of them, but there are many neurotransmitters and they have an interdependence on one another. And so, much like a spider's web, when you pull one side of it, there's going to be repercussions, and I just don't think that we have the capacity to fully measure what those repercussions are. And so I'm very hesitant to recommend them, and I personally don't take any. On the other hand, I think food is the ultimate nootropic. I think too many people reach for that supplement when there's a lot of low-hanging fruits in their diets and their lifestyles that they are ignoring. Instead, they're spending their hard-earned money on these supplements that I don't think are gonna give them as much bang for the buck relative to just eating foods that have nootropic compounds in them. Foods that I think are the most nootropic, well, I call them genius foods, and I'm a little biased because I wrote a book called Genius Foods, but I would say that avocado are a powerful nootropic food, and this is because they've got the highest concentration of fat-protecting antioxidants of any fruit or vegetable. And this is of particular relevance to the brain because the brain is made of fat, and it's not made of just any fat, it's made of a type of fat that is very vulnerable to a process called oxidation. So fat-soluble antioxidants like vitamin E and compounds that act like antioxidants like carotenoids, lutein and zeaxanthin, which are found in abundance in avocados, are very friendly to the brain, and they make the brain work better. They've found that levels of these antioxidant compounds, lutein and zeaxanthin, are actually directly related to brain performance, and that when younger people, who have brains that are already thought to be at their peak of performance, supplement with these compounds, again, lutein and zeaxanthin, their visual processing speed improves by about 20%. That's a University of Georgia study, which I cite in my book. I think grass-fed beef, it's a controversial food, but not to me. Grass-fed beef is loaded with nutrition, and the same carotenoids found in avocados and vitamin E, and also a compound called creatine, which you're only going to find in red meat and fish, that actually supports brain energy production, which is critical for healthy cognitive function. These kinds of foods are, I think, powerful nootropics. When I want an acute boost, I'll go for coffee. Everybody is going to react differently to coffee, but at the observational population level, we can see that people tend to have reduced risks for Alzheimer's disease, Parkinson's disease, and MS when they consume more coffee. So, I think your mileage may vary, but I tend to like coffee, and it acts like a nootropic for me. It's got caffeine and a number of different types of polyphenols. Green tea is another powerful nootropic food, which again has caffeine, like coffee, but it also has a unique amino acid called L-theanine, which is a nootropic. And actually you'll find L-theanine in many nootropic supplements, but you can get it much cheaper in a cup of green tea. So, I think there's a lot out there in terms of nootropics in our supermarkets, and you don't have to necessarily reach for supplements. I think supplements have a place once you've optimized other aspects of your diet and lifestyle, but to make that the sort of go-to choice for improving the way that your brain works, I think food is a much better option. Everything that we interact with affects us, whether we're cognizant of it or not. They've shown that loneliness can actually alter our gene expression. And so, social connection, feeling connected to something bigger than yourself, having a sense of purpose in life, they've actually found that having a sense of life purpose is related to lower levels of inflammation in the body. So, there's all these mental states that I don't know. I think we just tend to write off, but But I think, mental health is so important, and it relies on physical health. Physical health informs mental health, and our thoughts inform our bodies. They've done really interesting studies on furniture, where people sitting at wobbly furniture tend to project feelings of emotional instability, whereas people that are sitting on furniture that is more stable tend to feel more emotionally secure. Really funny study, actually. I've written about it for Psychology Today. I have a blog on Psychology Today, and I've gone into this study. People that were sitting at a table that was wobbly, shown pictures of celebrity couples, were more likely to predict that those couples would break up sooner. Like, they were more likely to predict negativity onto those celebrity couples. Whereas people that were sitting on furniture that was not wobbly had a more optimistic outlook for those couples. So it's just really interesting how our spaces shape our thoughts. And the people that we interact with shape our thoughts, and our interactions on social media shape our thoughts. And this is not an abstract concept. I mean, you can literally measure levels of dopamine in the brain when it comes to our interactions on social media. I mean, it's one of the reasons why social media addiction is so common today. I mean, this is a very new area for psychiatry, but social media addiction, addiction to hyperpalatable foods, addiction to pornography, I mean, they're all related, and we don't yet fully understand how, but I'm going to guess that the neurobiology underpinning all of them is similar. Environmental toxicity is everywhere today, and I mean, we have names to describe a few of those toxins, but they're ever present. The problem is many of these chemicals make it to market with the assumption that they're going to be innocent until proven guilty. But what I argue in my work is that many of these newer compounds should be guilty until proven innocent. I mean, we have countless examples of industry putting forth a compound or a chemical only later to be revealed as a potential toxin. Trans fats, partially hydrogenated oils, are the perfect example of that. We assume that they were innocent until proven guilty. These are fats that are created in a lab designed to act more like saturated fats at room temperature, and there is no safe level of trans fat consumption. These were put on the market. They, for decades, have flooded our supermarket shelves in peanut butters, in bakery goods, and things like that. Manufacturers love it, trans fats, because they're cheap and they add a sort of buttery consistency to foods. They also increase shelf life. But we now know that they are directly toxic to your vascular system. They harm the brain. And finally, thankfully, the FDA has outlawed partially hydrogenated oils. But the problem is that this is just one example. I mean, there are so many chemicals in the modern food environment that are detrimental to our health. I've become really interested lately in endocrine disrupting compounds like phthalates and bisphenols. Bisphenol A is the most commonly known one. It's abbreviated BPA. Many plastic products will proudly exclaim that their products are BPA free, but what they don't disclose is whether or not they have put other replacement chemicals in those products. The problem with these chemicals is that they are biologically active at levels far below the current regulatory thresholds for safety. And they affect your endocrine system, which is the system of hormones in your body. Now, hormones act like long-range messengers, so they're secreted by a gland in one part of the body, and they're meant to have an influence on organs in other parts of the body. And hormones affect every aspect of your being. They control your brain, they control your predilection for weight gain. I mean, most people, when I say the word hormones, they think about estrogen and testosterone. These chemicals act like those in the body. They mimic estrogen, and they can block the functionality of testosterone. But insulin is a hormone. Ghrelin is a hormone, which controls our hunger levels. Leptin is a hormone, which controls our metabolisms. And these chemicals have profound effects in ways that we can identify and describe and measure, and in ways that we have yet to realize how we might be able to measure. So I've become just really kind of concerned. And the most actionable thing that I've really started, or I think the most effective way that I've found to minimize my exposure to these products, because you're not going to be able to eliminate exposure to them. It's just, we're too far down the rabbit hole at this point. But really to use less plastic, to store your food in glass, to not use Teflon-coated pans, for example, to use cast iron pans like grandma always used, and stainless steel pans. I mean, these are ways of reducing your exposure to these kinds of chemicals. We breathe in chemicals. Many of the things that we fill our homes with, our furniture, leach. They off-gas chemicals into the air. Particles made of plastic get into the air. Flame retardants get into the air, which we breathe. Infants are at the highest risk for accumulating these compounds. Pesticides we ingest when we consume conventionally grown produce. We're confronted from every which way. It's like the modern world is the Hunger Games and your brain is an unwitting combatant just thrown into the fight. As all of this relates to the brain, well, I think it's pretty obvious that the brain is going to be affected. How it pertains to disease states like Alzheimer's disease, not necessarily clear, although there have been some studies performed in more polluted parts of the world, like in Mexico City, where they find that pollutants in the atmosphere called fine particulate matter, specifically a type of particulate matter called PM2.5, has been shown to actually not only get into circulation through the lungs, but to be able to pierce the blood-brain barrier and to accelerate pathologies that are associated with Alzheimer's disease far earlier than that disease would normally present itself. So, it's just, you really have to be careful. And, I want to caveat that with saying that stress is dangerous too, so you don't want to drive yourself nuts. But I think insofar as we are able to use healthier products in our kitchen and make a little more time to get out into nature and to breathe cleaner air, I think that those are all really important and probably going to move the needle on your brain health. The blood-brain barrier is meant to be this impenetrable shield that guards the brain, essentially, with the exception of allowing a couple dozen nutrients cross it so that the brain can receive fuel and be nourished. But other than that, it's a very selective membrane, sort of like the membrane in the digestive tract, the gut lining. And so the blood-brain barrier is really meant to keep toxins that are in the blood that the body can generally cope with through detox pathways and the like, to keep them out of the brain, because the brain is a little bit more delicate. The problem is that the blood-brain barrier can become leaky, and this is thought to occur for many reasons. Inflammation. Certain genes might predispose you to having vascular dysfunction in that capillary bed that makes up the blood-brain barrier. But generally, certain molecules, depending on how small they are nonetheless able to breach the blood-brain barrier. And this has been shown with certain airborne particles that constitute fine particulate matter, or PM2.5. One of them is called magnetite, which is produced by car exhausts and by power plants and the like, and pretty common in New York City, Los Angeles, big cities. I mean, magnetite is in the air, and it's been shown to be able to pierce the blood-brain barrier because it's small enough. Drugs that are more fat-loving, the scientific word for that is lipophilic, have also been shown to have the potential for breaching the blood-brain barrier. Certain toxins produced in the gut can enter the brain and produce inflammation. So, we really owe it to our brains, I think, to maintain the integrity of that barrier. The same way that we owe it to our digestive tracts, the matrix through which we absorb nutrients from our food, to maintain the integrity of that barrier too. The way to minimize the impact that these toxins have on our brains, there are so many ways. I mean, for one, eat a diet that is rich in antioxidants. So studies in China have shown that by supplementing with vitamin C and E, it actually helps our bodies better cope with these toxins. Our bodies have an amazing capacity to detox. You don't need detox tea to stoke your body's own detox pathways. And one of the ways that you can do that is by consuming more cruciferous vegetables. So when we consume vegetables like broccoli, cauliflower, radishes, cabbage, my personal favorite, broccoli sprouts, are particularly concentrated in compounds that tell your liver to activate, to basically turn on apps involved in detoxing against these environmental toxins. I'm also a huge fan of saunas. Now, saunas have been used for centuries in certain parts of the world, like Finland. Finland is actually the sauna capital of the world. And in the United States, saunas are associated with high-end gyms. But the mere act of sweating, whether you're sitting in a hot tub, in a sauna, or a steam room, or just, exercising, which we all know is really good for us, we're able to purge some of these toxins through our sweat. I mean, you can take most of the more commonly known toxins like bisphenols and phthalates, which are found in plastics, and you can literally go to Google or PubMed and search for the chemical name along with blood, sweat, and urine studies, and you'll find that many of these compounds actually come out in your sweat. So sweating is one of the our skin is a major detox organ for the body, and it relies on the ability to sweat to actually get these toxins out of your system. And so I'm a huge fan of saunas. They've done a number of studies in Finland, actually at the University of Eastern Finland, where they found that regular sauna use is associated with reduced risk for all types of dementia. About 65% risk reduction for dementia when you use sauna 4 to 7 times per week, and about a 22% risk reduction for sauna use 2 to 3 times a week. So there's a clear, almost an exponential dose response there. It's good for your cardiovascular function, and so I'm a huge fan of between regular sauna use and eating an antioxidant-rich diet. And consuming lots of cruciferous vegetables, I think that gives your body a pretty good shot at mitigating some of the risks incurred by modern toxin exposure. We're so deeply connected to our environment, and this is something that I think is a double-edged sword today. There are both good aspects to it, because it implies that when we get out into nature and when we do relatively simple things like when we be more active, when we expose ourselves to greater variation in temperature, when we get more sun on our skin, in our eyes, our biology is gonna pay us back for that. But on the other hand, it also makes us prone to dysregulation of our reward systems. It's one of the reasons why people today are so unhealthily dependent on social media. I think this is going to be a major question in the coming years: how to reduce our dependency, or how to, untether ourselves from that dopamine cycle that I think has become problematic for many people. I mean, attention is so valuable today. It's the new oil. It's the new limited resource, right? Everybody is vying for our attention, and really what that's doing is it's taking our attention away from the things that matter. One thing that I do to really kind of honor how valuable my own attention is when it comes to the things that I love is I try to limit my consumption of news, and I try to limit my consumption of social media. Now, I'm not perfect. I spend a lot of time on social media. It's part of what I do for a living. And I work in media, so for me it's important to stay up to date on the latest, what's going on, on various media platforms. But I'm very I've become a lot more deliberate with what I allow to occupy my attention, and I think most of the time the news is, the news media is just something that we could all do with a lot less of, if not go completely altogether without. The media exploits an ancient part of our brains that basically commands our attention when there is a stressful stimuli. This is the exact reason why in news media, if it bleeds, it leads. The most fear-inducing, alarmist, anxiety-provoking content is always teased up front, because they know that that's going to command your attention. Because when you hear something that is potentially stressful or that could potentially lead to harm, ancient stress response mechanisms in the body kick on, and these are the same responses that would kick on if you were, on the savannah and you saw a lion running after you. I mean, we have a physiological response. Our brain secretes neurotransmitters designed to hone in our focus and attention. The reality is most of the stuff that you're going to hear on news doesn't concern you at all, has no impact on you, your life, the lives of your loved ones, your health. And so I think for the most part, it's better to get, the facts from, Twitter, if you want, or social media platforms that just give you the facts, and to really kind of like limit your consumption of, news that really has no concern for your mental, well-being. It's just true. I mean, having worked in media, I could tell you that mental health is not something that is really all that much of a concern for programmers who just want ratings. And the same could be said for new media, digital publications. The most anxiety-provoking headlines are going to get the most clicks and are going to get the most traction on social media. So it's just it's a problem. But I think if you're able to just kind of uncouple yourself from the 24-hour news cycle and take breaks in your day where your use of social media, maybe you cut it off, maybe you go to the gym and you keep your phone in the locker, for example, I think you're going to be very well served. Don't just be a passive consumer of social media. I mean, I'm like everybody else. I waste far too many minutes, maybe hours of the day scrolling passively through my Instagram feed or my Twitter feed. That's a choice that I am making, whether or not I'm conscious of it. And I think if you want to use social media to break the cycle and to connect with people, be active. Find the people that inspire you, that you want to connect with, and send them a DM and connect with them. I try to respond to every single message that I get. It's not always possible, but I know that, it's a way that it's a really, powerful means of making friends. I have friends in my life today, really good friends, that I met first on social media. And it was all about taking that risk, about sending that message. Whether or not I knew if they were going to respond to me, I played an active role. I was like, I like that person's putting out cool stuff, I want to connect with them. And that's something that we each have the ability to do. Community is so important. We're influenced in so many ways by our peer group, and there's an evolutionary basis for that. We were part of the tribe, and if we didn't sort of adhere to tribe mentality, we'd be the odd person out, and nobody wants to be the odd person out. That's both another example of a double-edged sword, right? I mean, it leads to conformity on the one hand, which I think society is pushed forward by the nonconformists, but on the other hand, it just tells you how valuable community is for us, for the areas of our lives where we become highly influenced, and our diets, our lifestyles, our values, these are all strongly influenced by the communities that we surround ourselves with. There are statistics, and I can't quote them exactly, but you're more likely to be overweight if your friend group is overweight and doesn't adhere to healthy ideals than if your family is. That shows you right there that nurture is more important than nature when it comes to your predilection for weight gain. And because our weight and our metabolisms are so influenced by our diets, and because our metabolisms have such a strong influence over our brain health, our brain is the most metabolically active organ in the body, then in that capacity I would say, look, we know that Alzheimer's disease is a non-communicable disease, but maybe in some way it is. Maybe it is insofar as we're able to socially connect with people, and social isolation is a major risk factor for Alzheimer's disease. Being, depression, chronic depression is a risk factor for Alzheimer's disease. Our diets, eating a diet that is healthy and that promotes metabolic health, these are important ways of minimizing our risk for developing Alzheimer's disease, and these are all factors that are influenced by our community. So community is critically important for nearly every aspect of our health. Nutrition, I would say, is a category that can be extended to the conversations that we're having with our friends. You can either have a nutritious conversation with somebody that's interesting to you and that piques your curiosity, or you can have a junk food conversation. you can go on a trip that's like a sort of junk food trip, which is all about, maybe gluttony and eating, indulgent foods. Or you can go on a trip where you're actually going to learn something and you're going to connect with a loved one, or you're going to, expose yourself to new sights and new ideas and new languages and new geographies that are going to cause your mind to stretch. I really love that, the metaphor of, other aspects of life being either nutritious or being junk food. And I think, we don't have to live nutritiously 100% of the time. But I think as long as we make that the rule, and then we venture out for fun 10 to 20% of the time, I think that's fine. I'll move to a different city if my friends are in that city. I love being around my friends, and I also love being around my family, to the point where I'm in the process right now of moving from New York to Los Angeles to be closer to my friends. But in doing so, I'm going to be away from my family. So I'm trying to get my family actually to move to LA so that we can all be in the same state. Because I think, life is short. And you really want to be around the people that you care about. I've spent a lot of time away from my family because of the nature of my job, and I would, there have been times in the past where I've only been able to see them in 3-month intervals. And I would feel that every time I would go home and see my family, they would all look just like a little bit older. And I just, I think being close to your family, the people that you love, it's super important. So I'm willing to pretty much at this point in my life do anything to make sure that I can spend as much time as I can around the people that I care about. At the same time, making friends with your mind, being comfortable alone, I think that's a skill also that needs to be cultivated. And so I think you need to have both. You should be able to be alone and to be happy, but not, but that's a choice that I think we should each be able to make. I think if you don't have that choice, and I think if you're chronically lonely, you should try to orient your life in a way that allows you to feel a deeper sense of connection. Now, if you don't have the choice, then I think that's where social media can be a very beneficial thing. I think social media can be great if you live in a small town, and you feel ostracized for whatever reason. If you're the only person in your family that wants to be healthy and your friends won't support you, then by all means get on social media, connect with other people that are going to support your goals, and unfollow the people that aren't supportive of your goals. I think that's where social media really is a beautiful thing. So it's all about kind of looking at your own circumstance and doing an inventory and kind of shifting your environment to support your goals. And identifying those goals is a great first step. At the end of the day, one of the best things in life is being able to have dinner or lunch with friends. And so if you can kind of cultivate a routine where, every day or every night you're able to go somewhere and see people that you enjoy the company of, then that's a great thing. That's a totally great thing, and I hope that you can build that in whatever city you're in. To me, intermittent fasting is mostly about honoring our body's circadian biology, and by not eating super late into the night, and by not eating immediately after waking up. These are all modern constructs advised by companies that have a vested interest in making sure that we are eating and or snacking all throughout the day. But one of the things that does, it does a few things. One, it makes it very easy to consume too much food, and consume too many calories. When you're eating 6 meals a day, with every meal you have to make a decision about whether or not you're going to eat something healthy or not healthy. And eating food actually, you would think that eating food satiates your hunger, but actually eating food makes you want to eat more food. It's why appetizers are served before the main course. If an appetizer reduced your hunger, nobody would eat them before the main course, right? So, and snack products and breakfast cereals and, even from the health industry, meal replacement powders and protein powders. I mean, we're told that for whatever reason, we need to be eating constantly throughout the day. For most Americans that are consuming the standard American diet, and this is something that's increasingly spreading around the world, it's not just limited to Americans, but your average person is consuming now 300 grams of carbohydrates every single day. And it's not that they're consuming those 300 grams of carbohydrates in one meal at the end of the day. No, they're consuming them spread out over the entire course of the day. And the latest estimates suggest, according to a research calculation published in the Journal of Alzheimer's Disease, almost 40% of Alzheimer's cases might be owed to chronically elevated insulin, which is a hormone that becomes stimulated when we consume carbohydrates. So by keeping insulin chronically elevated all throughout the day, it's problematic. I mean, it's problematic because, insulin is our chief fat storage hormone, but it also prevents fat from being burned as a fuel source. And the brain loves to burn fat for fuel. When the brain is using fat for fuel, it's actually in the form of ketone bodies, which are, the brain can't directly burn fat. These fatty acids have to be first converted by the liver to ketones. Intermittent fasting basically provides a way for insulin to come down low enough so that ketones can be generated by the liver, and that the brain can use these cleaner burning fuel substrates. Most people are consuming all throughout the day. They're in a fed state all day. But when we're not eating, when we are, in a fasted state, that allows catabolic processes in the body to basically kick on. And these processes range from the breaking down of stored fats so that our brains can use those fats for fuel when they're converted to ketone bodies, or the breaking down of worn out proteins. And this is a process called autophagy, which is linked to longevity and may help the brain break down proteins that aggregate and form clumps that are related to conditions like Alzheimer's disease and Parkinson's disease. So when it comes to the brain, I think fasting is a really critical tool. It's also a means of increasing levels of BDNF, which is the brain's sort of miracle grow protein. It stands for brain-derived neurotrophic factor, and it's a powerful growth factor in the brain that actually produces the growth of new neurons, which is critically important. Increasing brain plasticity is a way of potentially fending off conditions like Alzheimer's disease, but maybe also a way of healing from depression. So these are all things that fasting, I think, is very plausibly going to be helpful for, and your mileage may vary. So the way that I practice it is I won't eat for an hour or two after waking up, and I won't eat for 2 to 3 hours before I go to sleep. And you may find that to be easy, and you may want to expand those windows, or if it's your first time ever fasting, you may find that to be very difficult. You really want to kind of see where your own threshold of comfort is, but know that sometimes your best self is going to come about by leaving your comfort zone behind. And fasting is one of these things where it may not be easy at first, but I think the rewards in terms of brain function, they're pretty significant. And the research is new and evolving, but it's an area that I'm super excited about. Ketogenesis, when your liver creates ketone bodies out of your stored fat, I call that biochemical liposuction, which is basically kind of a cheeky way of saying that your own body is sucking out your stored fat, converting it to ketones that your brain can then burn off. So I think people today are obsessed with body composition and going on crazy fad diets, and some people even going so far as to get actual liposuction. But your body will happily perform its own form of liposuction if you allow insulin to drop so that these fats can come out, or if you just eat less. I think given the modern foods that now line our supermarket shelves, just eating less is a lot easier said than done. So by adhering to a low carbohydrate diet, which is called a ketogenic diet, it allows ketosis to occur, which is what I call biochemical liposuction. So when it comes to gut health, I like to support my gut's health with a combination of probiotics and prebiotics. I tend to get both of these requirements from food, and my favorite probiotic containing foods are kimchi, raw sauerkraut, pickles, grass-fed full-fat yogurt. I don't consume a ton of dairy, but when I do, I think fermented dairy is probably going to be okay, unless you have a sensitivity to dairy for whatever reason. And then when it comes to prebiotics, I like to incorporate every single day a large fatty salad into my diet, and that's going to be packed with prebiotic fiber. And what prebiotic really means is that it contains what Justin and Erica Sonnenberg at Stanford University have called macrobiota accessible carbohydrates. So our gut is comprised of this virtual universe of trillions of microorganisms that consume a very specific type of carbohydrate. If you look on the back of any food product with a nutrition label, you'll see that fiber falls under the carbohydrate category. And you want to feed them these fibers along with any number of plant compounds, polyphenols, phytonutrients, and things like that, because it basically supports the community of beneficial bacteria, which gives them a competitive advantage over less beneficial, more problematic, maybe even pathogenic bacteria that live in the gut. And aside from that, when they consume this fiber, they churn out these chemicals that are very beneficial and anti-inflammatory. Short-chain fatty acids, including butyrate, which was one of the more studied of the group. I like to make those a part of my diet. There are other non-dietary ways in which you can support gut health. You want to be really sort of careful about antibiotic use. Certainly antibiotics are indicated for a number of conditions, but they also tend to be overprescribed these days, research shows. So you want to ask your physician whether or not the antibiotic that he's prescribing is really necessary. I don't use hand sanitizers or anything like that. I also like to spend a lot of time in nature and traveling. When you spend more time in nature, playing in the dirt, like we used to do as kids, that actually seeds our intestines with soil-based bacteria. And this is all, really good stuff. I mean, we're at the tip of the iceberg in terms of understanding the full breadth of how our, gut microbiome affects our brain health. But we do know that there is a very compelling relationship there. And I think, the coming years, decades maybe, are gonna turn up some incredible insights in terms of that relationship. But for now, I think the best thing that we can do is just eat a healthy diet full of organic, vegetables, low sugar fruits, and try to do what we can to honor our intestinal immigrant inhabitants. So there is no one-size-fits-all diet. Maybe 10,000 years ago in your tribe, that tribe all ate a certain way, and everybody had a certain health profile. But today we live in a world where we are, people with vastly different genetic backgrounds, different health profiles, different upbringings, are all sort of thrust into the same food environment and tasked with contending with the same kinds of foods and birthing practices all together. And the reality is that we're all different. And so for all of us to expect to be able to thrive on, the USDA's My Plate paradigm or a one-size-fits-all diet set forth in a diet book, I think it's unlikely that's going to be the answer. I mean, in my writing, I like to add caveats to everything, that there is no such thing as a one-size-fits-all diet. But, the carnivore diet is a perfect example of how, potentially people with certain autoimmune conditions, which is a non-trivial portion of the population, and it's autoimmunity is increasing in prevalence, might actually be thriving and experiencing a reprieve of symptoms by cutting out plants. And you have to ask yourself why. Well, plants have compounds in them that are meant to act like defense compounds. Some people call them antifeedants for insects and mold and pests and things like that. These compounds are designed to make smaller animals sick so as to discourage them from consuming the plant. In a human being with a robust immune system, these compounds actually act like little hormetic stressors. Like they apply just enough stress to the cellular environment to actually make us more robust. But that's like in a best case scenario. That's if you're a human being that was, born and maybe you spent a lot of time around dogs and playing in the soil, and you were perhaps born vaginally and maybe you weren't overprescribed antibiotics as a kid. That's sort of like a best case scenario today, and it's becoming increasingly rare. Today, we have a lot of people that have allergies and have autoimmune conditions, and so I think that for those people, and this is my theory, that for those people, these plant compounds that in a more robust organism might actually add just enough beneficial stress to make that person stronger and more resilient and healthier and feel better, that in a person with a compromised immune system or a susceptible immune system actually leads to problems, actually leads to the exacerbation of symptoms. People that are on these carnivore diets are the perfect example of how one-size-fits-all diets don't work for people in the 21st century. The link between depression and unhealthy eating has long been known in the medical literature, but the direction of causality has been a big question mark. But we now know, thanks to a number of animal studies and small clinical trials, that by improving your diet, you actually can improve your mental health. And more research needs to be done. These trials tend to be small and underfunded, but they've actually shown at Deakin University's Food and Mood Center that when you take patients with major depression and you put them on a diet rich in whole foods, vegetables, extra virgin olive oil, grass-fed beef, that they actually have a significant reprieve in symptoms, to the point that some actually go into remission and no longer qualify as being clinically depressed. I don't know if that's going to be the case for everybody necessarily, but animal studies are also very interesting. They can take rats and inject them with inflammatory compounds, and those rats will start to exhibit depressive behavior. And then when they give those rats anti-inflammatory compounds like omega-3s that are typically found in fish oil, it actually mitigates the increase in depressive behavior when these rats are injected with these inflammatory compounds. So the relationship between inflammation and depression seems to be one where inflammation can, especially in a susceptible person, create feelings of depression. Whereas by doing what you can to minimize inflammation, by eating a healthier diet, by eating more vegetables, cutting out the refined grain and seed oils like canola oil, corn oil, soybean oil, eating less processed carbohydrates, you actually can improve symptoms of depression. Anxiety is a little bit different than depression, but there have been a handful of small trials to show where anti-inflammatory compounds, again, like fish oil, can actually reduce symptoms of anxiety. There's one study where this actually happened in, there were medical students, which, medical students are chronically anxious, and fish oil seemed to lead to a significant improvement in symptoms. And also just eating a lower diet that has fewer carbohydrates actually can potentially reduce feelings of anxiety, because for many of us, when our blood sugar dips below what it normally is and we experience something called reactive hypoglycemia, we actually can feel a little bit anxious. And so if you're prone to anxiety, eating a diet that keeps your blood sugar more stable, a lower carbohydrate diet can actually help with that. There are other aspects of our cognition that are tethered to our diets. Executive function, ADD, ADHD are thought to be conditions related to executive function, which sort of encapsulates our ability to focus, pay attention, tune out distractions, plan, make decisions, things like that. Inflammation seems to reduce executive function, whereas eating a healthier diet seems to boost levels of executive function. So these are all sort of aspects of this new field that's being called nutritional psychiatry, and there are a handful of researchers working on it, and it's super exciting, because today 1 in 7 younger people are experiencing some kind of memory complaint. And that's not something that I think is right. We're each entitled to, I think, a brain that works as well as it ought to, and yet optimal brain function today, it seems, is a privilege afforded to the few. And so by eating a healthier diet, by embracing these very basic, ancient lifestyle principles, I really think that we can actually tune up our brains in a very powerful way. I'm all about optimizing the brain, and diet is a major, aspect of my protocol, but I also love, various ways of hacking my environment to also suit the needs of my brain. Our brains are still operating on version 1.0 of its operating system. They haven't changed all that much. And yet our modern world has. So, the things that I like to do really are not so much biohacking as they are environment hacking, to make the environment more similar to the environment in which the brain evolved. So I love to use saunas, which robustly activate proteins in the body that act like guardians to your other proteins. They're called heat shock proteins, actually. So it's a little complicated, but they act like buttresses, supporting proteins during times of stress so that they are less likely to misfold. And if you look at any of the major neurodegenerative conditions like Alzheimer's disease, Parkinson's disease, these are proteopathic conditions that involve the misfolding and aggregation of proteins. So saunas are critically important. They also are wonderful for our vascular system. They improve something called vascular flexibility, and they reduce blood pressure, and saunas act like a way of hacking aerobic exercise. Saunas actually act like an aerobic exercise mimetic. I always notice when I go into a sauna, I keep actually my fingers on my pulse, and I notice that my pulse goes up to about what it would be during, a moderate jog on the treadmill. So, that's especially useful if you are, less mobile, if you're nursing a sports injury. Saunas aren't without risk, so you always, if you have a medical condition, you want to, ask your doctor first. But saunas are great, and also you sweat out many of the toxins that we accumulate over the course of the day. Everything from phthalates to bisphenols to flame retardants to heavy metals, arsenic, iron, lead, cadmium. They've identified significant quantities of these compounds in our sweat. So it's a great detox method. I also love cold water immersion, either cold showers or actually going into a cold bath or pool, or cryotherapy, which is when you stand in a chamber that's cooled by nitrogen gas. That to me really boosts my mental acuity. And they've shown that doing so boosts levels of a neurotransmitter called norepinephrine, which is involved in focus and attention. So it really dials in my focus. So the other thing that I like to do is I like to be very diligent over the light that I allow to enter my eyes. And this, applies to in the morning. I want to make sure that I'm stepping outside and I'm getting good bright blue light from the sun into my eyes to help anchor my body's circadian rhythm. But it also applies to the end of the day as well. I become much more selective about the light that I allow to enter my eyes. Blue light disrupts our pineal gland's melatonin secretion. So melatonin is the hormone that helps our bodies wind down and get good restful sleep. And so later on in the day, I'm wearing blue light blocking glasses for about 2 to 3 hours before I go to sleep. And I've actually noticed that when I watch TV, or if I'm using my computer working into the wee hours, if I forget to wear my blue light blocking glasses, the next morning, whether or not I've had a full 8 hours of sleep, I'll have what I've come to refer to as a light hangover. I'll have like a hangover from the light that I allowed into my eyes that I probably shouldn't have the night before. And my theory is that when we're looking at bright screens, whether our televisions or our smartphones, it basically shuts down our brain's production of melatonin. They've actually shown this. But I think that it really has a marked effect on the quality of our sleep, and I actually feel it. I've woken up a few times where I feel like I have had an actual hangover, even though I had no alcohol the night before. It was all, I think, due to the light, and I rarely have them when I put my blue light blocking glasses on. The easiest way to get a little bit of cold immersion is to take a cold shower. Start with the shower as you would normally take it, and for the last 10, 15 seconds, maybe go a little bit colder. It might shock you a little bit, but that's really you're gonna feel much more awake and alive afterwards. And try, with every shower to, increase the amount of time or decrease the temperature. You don't have to go all that cold. They've actually done studies where in ambient room temperature of about 66 degrees Fahrenheit, which is really not that cold, there's been a positive influence on the metabolism. So I'm not sure how that translates necessarily to water, but I certainly think that taking a cooler shower, it's like standing under a waterfall in nature. Like we weren't able to alter the temperature of those waterfalls or the lakes that we would bathe in for the vast majority of our time as hunter-gatherers. And so to allow the water to get a little bit cooler and to stand under that, it's probably going to do your health, some benefit. And I hope there's a researcher out there that will validate that suggestion. But it's definitely something that has become an indispensable part of my health routine.
If you love that last video, you should check out the next one for sure on getting to the root cause of all disease.
Pathogenic microbes, bacteria, yeast, viruses may be doing the seeding of the plaques, where the plaques are actually forming to protect the